The House chamber buzzed with quiet tension as Representative Jasmine Crockett approached the podium. C-SPAN cameras focused on the freshman Democrat from Texas, her braided hair neatly tied back, wearing a striking purple suit that stood out among the dark blues and grays of the House floor. Across the room, Speaker Mike Johnson sat stiffly in his chair, scrolling through his phone, seemingly indifferent to the 5 minutes of speaking time allotted to the outspoken Congresswoman. "Mr. Speaker," Crockett began, her voice calm yet commanding. The chamber fell silent as her tone demanded attention. "Today I rise not as a Democrat addressing a Republican, but as an American speaking about a serious breach of public trust." Johnson glanced up briefly, his expression composed, showing the polite detachment of someone used to routine criticism. Another opposition speech, he thought, nodding slightly before returning to his phone. Crockett's voice grew stronger. "Last week, you stood at this very podium and told the American people that the new border bill was created with, quote, full transparency and unprecedented bipartisan cooperation. I have in my possession documents that not only contradict that claim, but also reveal a troubling pattern of intentional misinformation presented to members of this body." This time, Johnson looked up completely, his brow tightening. A few nearby representatives paused their conversations, turning toward Crockett. "These documents," she said, holding up a folder bearing the House seal, "prove that the final version of the bill was secretly changed after committee approval. Key enforcement measures were removed and new loopholes added without informing the minority members who had negotiated in good faith." The quiet background chatter in the chamber grew louder. Johnson placed his phone on the desk, sitting upright as Republican whips moved through the aisles, whispering to colleague. "But what's even more concerning," Crockett continued, her voice cutting through the growing noise, "is who actually wrote these changes." She paused, locking eyes with Johnson across the chamber. "Mr. Speaker, would you care to explain why entire passages from private industry lobbyists appear in sections of this bill that you personally certified were drafted by your staff?" A stunned silence filled the room. Johnson's face lost color as he leaned toward the parliamentarian. Cameras shifted between Crockett's composed expression and Johnson's visible unease. "Point of order," Mr. Speaker called out the Republican Majority Leader, trying to interrupt. "I still have 4 minutes and 20 seconds remaining," Crockett said steadily. "And I plan to use them." What unfolded in the next few minutes would send ripples through Congress and shift the political balance in Washington. Before we continue with what Crockett revealed next, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more in-depth political coverage exposing what really happens behind the scenes in Washington. Jasmine Crockett hadn't come to Congress to follow tradition. A civil rights attorney before winning her Texas seat in 2022, she built her reputation on careful preparation and fearless accountability. While many new representatives spent their early terms learning the system, Crockett quickly established herself as someone who did her homework and wasn't afraid to use it. She approaches Congress like she approached the courtroom. Her former law partner said in a Texas Tribune profile earlier that year, "She gathers evidence, builds a solid case, and delivers it without hesitation, no matter who's on the other side." This method earned her respect among progressives, but also made her a frequent target for conservative outlets who describe her as combative and overly aggressive. Her viral response to that criticism during a CNN interview made her position clear. "When men are firm and direct, they're called effective. When I do the same, I'm called aggressive. I'll keep being aggressive for the people who elected me." Across the chamber sat Speaker Mike Johnson, who rose to leadership after Kevin McCarthy's removal through a turbulent process. The Louisiana Republican had presented himself as a steady, faith-driven conservative capable of uniting a divided GOP. His calm demeanor and reputation for personal integrity initially earned him praise from both lawmakers and media alike. Johnson represents a return to civility. Fox News host Sean Hannity had said after his election, "He's a constitutionalist who values transparency and honest debate, but 7 months into his tenure that goodwill was fading." Moderate Republicans complained of being sidelined, while Democrats accused him of breaking promises made during key negotiations. The border security bill, at the heart of this confrontation, had been promoted by Johnson as his signature bipartisan achievement. After months of gridlock, it passed with support from moderate Democrats and nearly all Republicans. Johnson spent the following week on a media tour celebrating it as proof that Congress could still cooperate to address national challenges. What the public didn't yet know was that serious concerns had emerged about how the final text was crafted and whether commitments made during negotiations had been upheld. The stakes of this exchange went well beyond one piece of legislation. With midterm elections approaching and control of Congress uncertain, questions about honesty and leadership could reshape the political landscape. For Republicans, any sign that their speaker had misled colleagues threatened their message of government reform and transparency. This isn't just a policy dispute, political scientist Melissa Harris Perry said on MSNBC earlier that morning. Unaware of what was about to unfold, the real question is whether our legislative process has become so compromised that even bipartisan agreements can't be trusted. For Johnson, the personal stakes were immense. He had built his image as a man of integrity, someone who could restore faith in congressional leadership. Any confirmed evidence of deception could destroy not just his political agenda, but his credibility as a leader. For Crockett, the gamble was equally high. Directly challenging the Speaker on the House floor was a bold move that could either define her as a fearless advocate for accountability or expose her to accusations of grandstanding if her evidence failed to deliver. As the minutes passed, the tension in the chamber mirrored those risks. Republican members clustered protectively around Johnson, occasionally whispering advice while Democrats sat silently waiting for what would come next. Members watched closely, fully aware that Representative Crockett's presentation would reflect on the integrity of her entire party. As she prepared to present her evidence, the historical weight of the moment was evident. A freshman congresswoman was directly confronting the Speaker, accusing him of misleading actions in the legislative process. This confrontation could either fade into insignificance or become a defining moment for political accountability. Johnson adjusted his tie and leaned toward the parliamentarian, seemingly looking for procedural grounds to interrupt Crockett's remaining time. But before he could act, she continued her careful presentation. Before we review the altered text of the bill, Crockett began, let's establish the context that makes these revisions so concerning. She called the chamber's attention to Exhibit A. As aides distributed documents to members, these are the official minutes from the final bipartisan negotiation on the Border Security Act dated exactly 2 weeks ago. A section appeared on the chamber's main screen. Page 3 clearly shows Speaker Johnson's personal commitment, and I quote, "No substantial changes will be made to the enforcement provisions in sections 4 through 7 as agreed upon by this working group." Every member of that group, Republican and Democrat alike, relied on that assurance when supporting the bill. C-SPAN cameras captured the scene as Republican members quickly reviewed the documents while Johnson spoke quietly with the parliamentarian. Yet, Crockett continued, the final version of this bill contains 17 substantive alterations to those very sections. These are not simple technical edits. They are fundamental changes that weaken enforcement mechanisms and introduced new exemptions never discussed in bipartisan meetings. She displayed a side-by-side comparison on the screen. For example, Section 4EB3 originally required compliance verification within 30 days. The final version extends that to 180 days and adds a clause allowing unlimited 90-day extensions. This completely undermines the enforcement timeline that moderate Democrats demanded as a condition of their support. Murmurs spread through the Democratic side, particularly among moderates who had voted for the bill. Several were seen questioning their staff, pointing to specific sections with visible frustration. Finally, Johnson rose. "Point of order, Mr. Speaker," he said, addressing the presiding officer. "The gentlewoman from Texas is misrepresenting standard legislative refinements and assigning improper motives to routine procedural adjustment." "I appreciate the Speaker's description," Crockett replied calmly. "But let's move to Exhibit B." New documents appeared on the screen. These are emails between the Speaker's chief, legislative aide, and representatives of the Border Industry Coalition, a lobbying group representing private detention contractors. Johnson's expression tightened as Crockett continued. This email sent 3 days after the bipartisan agreement and 2 days before the final bill text was released includes an attachment titled Proposed Modifications to Enforcement Provisions. When we compare this document created by private industry lobbyists to the final bill, we find that 15 of the 17 changes match word for word. The chamber erupted with noise. Democratic members stood in disbelief, while Republicans gathered in small, uneasy groups. The presiding officers struck the gavel repeatedly, attempting to restore order. An unexpected interruption came as Representative Jim Jordan, one of Johnson's close allies, approached the front. Crockett raised her hand. "I still have my time, and I intend to use it," she said firmly. "The evidence is not yet complete." Jordan hesitated, then returned to his seat. Crockett presented Exhibit C. "This," she said, "is perhaps the most troubling document of all. A text message exchanged between Speaker Johnson and the president of the Border Industry Coalition dated one day before the final text was released." She read aloud. "Changes implemented as discussed. Dems won't notice until after passage. We'll call you after the vote." The room fell silent. Johnson's expression turned from concern to shock. Democratic members looked stunned while many Republicans appeared conflicted, some rallying behind their speaker, others distancing themselves in discomfort. "Mr. Speaker," Crockett said, turning directly toward him, "would you like to explain to this body, especially the Democratic members who supported this bill in good faith, why you promised no substantive changes would be made while secretly coordinating with industry lobbyists to alter key enforcement provisions?" Johnson stood again, his composure strained. "These claims are being taken completely out of context," he said. "The communications were part of normal stakeholder outreach to ensure practical implementation. No commitments were violated in spirit or intent." "The evidence suggests otherwise," Crockett replied. She displayed a split-screen comparison showing the bipartisan agreement, the lobbyists' recommendations, and the final text. "These are not interpretations," she said. "They are direct, textual matches. The enforcement mechanisms that secured bipartisan support were systematically weakened according to industry requests without notice to those who negotiated them." The tension in the chamber reached a breaking point. The gavel struck continuously as members from both sides demanded recognition. "I have 1 minute remaining," Crockett announced, her voice cutting through the noise, "and I want to use it not just to discuss what happened, but why it matters." The room gradually quieted, all eyes fixed on the freshman representative who had just shifted the chamber's balance of power. "This isn't just about a policy disagreement," she said in a steady, deliberate tone. "It's about whether we can function as a legislative body. If members cannot trust that agreements made in good faith will be honored, the foundation of our work collapses. When private interests can secretly, when we rewrite legislation after a bipartisan agreement, we stop being true representatives of the people." Turning to face the entire chamber instead of just Johnson, Crockett continued. "I came to Congress believing that no matter our disagreements, the integrity of our process was sacred. Today, I'm asking members of both parties to prove that still holds true." With impeccable timing, her 5 minutes expired just as she concluded her statement. The weight of her words lingered as the presiding officer, visibly shaken, announced, "The gentlewoman's time has expired." But everyone in the chamber and millions watching at home understood that something far more significant had ended than just her allotted time. For several seconds, silence filled the room. Then chaos erupted. Democratic members rose to their feet, some demanding an immediate response from Johnson, others calling for an emergency ethics inquiry. Republican reactions were split. Party leaders gathered protectively around Johnson while moderate members stood apart, visibly unsettled as they reviewed the documents Crockett had shared. The presiding officer banged the gavel repeatedly. "The House will be in order. The House will be in order." Finally, Majority Leader Steve Scalise was recognized. "Mr. Speaker, I move that the House stand in recess subject to the call of the chair before the motion could proceed." Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Objection. The House deserves an immediate response to these extraordinary allegations. The Speaker must address this chamber now. The parliamentarian leaned in to consult with a presiding officer, who appeared increasingly overwhelmed by the procedural turmoil unfolding before them. Amid the confusion, Johnson approached the well of the House, signaling that he wished to speak. Instantly, the room fell silent, every eye fixed on him. "I appreciate the opportunity to respond to these allegations," Johnson began, his voice steadier than his expression. What Representative Crockett presented is a misleading narrative built on selective evidence and misrepresented communications. Straightening his posture, he tried to project confidence. The adjustments made to the final text were technical corrections intended to uphold the spirit of our bipartisan deal while ensuring the bill's enforceability. We consulted various stakeholders, including industry experts, for practical input. This is standard legislative procedure.